world. So tonight we're going to be talking about extreme ownership in combination with Pitch Anything. We have a fantastic panel. We have a great guest who's joining us to share his experiences. So in true hustle fashion, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves. Mike, please take it away.
I'm Mike Manoske. I teach career development and job search at Wharton. I'm the director of coaching at Hire Club, and I'm a certified coach with a private practice as well.
Sophia.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sophia Jagoe-Seidl. I am a current senior at Fordham University, located in New York City. I am interning for our athletic department in the communications and social media aspect, and I'm very excited to be here today to discuss everything with you all.
Craig Strong.
Hi, my name is Craig Strong. I work for General Electric. I've been there about 20 years. Work primarily in operations, global supply chain. Before General Electric, I was in the Army for 10 years. Served in the aviation branch and a Black Hawk pilot. So glad to be here as well. Thank you for the invite, Cynthia.
We are thrilled to have you. So in true fashion, you know, we've read these books, right? We've read Pitch Anything, we've read Extreme Ownership, and there's three main, I would say, takeaways from everything that we've read. And that's, you know, staying simple in your message, right? You know, being consistent, right? Whether that's in your communication, whether that's in your leadership style, leading up and down the chain of command, and then owning everything. Even when we were reading Pitch Anything, Mike, you know, the author was talking about how even if it's not your deal, that's fine. You just keep moving. So I'd really like to, you know, dive into your experience, Craig, from the construct of extreme ownership. And we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier today. You know, when you think about your learnings in the military, when you think about how you led, you know, as a Black Hawk commander and how you've led as an executive at General Electric Company, what are some of the overlaps? What are some of the learnings? Did you learn things in this kind of extreme ownership mentality that you've been able to apply, or was it completely different?
I would say a little bit of both, right? So many similarities, but some differences as well. In the military, you rely so much on the soldier to your left and your right. Everybody has their job to do, and they have ownership, right, of their sector, right? Ownership of their task of maintaining that weapon, if you will. So everybody has a very distinct, very defined role, and they own it. And that's the expectation from day one. It doesn't matter what your rank is in the military. Everybody has a very distinct role. Everybody has ownership of the tasks that come with that role. In the business world, probably not as well defined, but yet if you don't have that level of ownership, you start to lose sense of purpose, and you start to vary away from the overall mission of the organization. So, you know, trying to instill that sense of ownership amongst the team, that everybody is rowing in the same direction, if you will, it certainly has helped. And in the context of communicating simply, that is so key, right? To have everybody on the same script, understanding the purpose, and owning their part of that purpose, it's equally effective. So that sense of ownership, role, responsibility has proven key, not only in the military, but also in my business experience.
Thank you so much. Harold, I'd love to have you pull in here and talk to us a little bit about, you know, keeping that communication simple when you're leading international teams. I mean, you know, from medical innovative collaborative to global sales teams at Nike, how do you keep communication simple, especially when you put the DEI lens on it? And how are you communicating with teams in China versus teams in Eastern Europe versus teams in the US?
Right. That's a large question, but I think it boils down to what I heard Craig kind of mention. And it's about just the consistency of communication. There are a lot of meetings, there's a lot of over communication, but the key piece is everyone, if we can use both books, everyone needs to have extreme ownership of the project. You need to buy into it. You need to stay abreast of changes and engage. If you are just kind of phoning it in, it makes simple conversation difficult because we don't have a point to reference from. But if we can understand the project, own the project, and engage in those discussions, that's a huge piece. The reason global projects are so difficult is obviously time zone and language, but also cultural kind of scenarios. So we can't add a lot of extra levels of complications to a project that needs to be finished on time, on budget, for a customer who's very demanding. Instead, what needs to happen is through a series of meetings, once we understand who we are as a global team or as a diverse team or as we bring new people who've just been hired or moved into the department onto the project, review what the mission is. What is the objective that we're all trying to achieve? What is our timeline and what is your specific role? If you run into a problem, here are people who can assist and support you to get back on point, on budget, on time. We kind of move forward from there. The new piece, though, if I'm new to the department, I have to be very clear in the part that I don't know. This isn't a fake it till you make it kind of play, because this is a professional opportunity. This isn't pickup basketball or football. This is a professional opportunity where you contribute and play a vital role. Everyone plays a vital role. So a short answer to your question is to have extreme ownership in that project, to engage and to challenge people where they may be off point or I may not understand it. But with extreme ownership, with constant deliberate communication, it maintains a timely, deliverable project in a very simple way.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Harold. Mike, I wanted to kind of take the opportunity to pull you in on this. You know, we're kind of straddling the line here in our conversations between you're a leader, you potentially want to level up, or you have some new leadership opportunities coming your way. When we shift the lens to job seeker, because in hustle, we kind of balance both, right? You're leveling up or you want to seek new opportunities. When we shift the lens to job seekers, and you've, shared a plethora of knowledge with us, thank you so much. What are some of the ways that clients of yours have either kept the messaging simple or made it so complex people couldn't follow?
And they've done both very well. I think the interesting thing about your question is we in the book that we have coming out and everything else, we talk about how to tell a story. And in the books we read in Craig's Military and what Harold was explaining so well, it really is how clearly can you communicate the outcome, the expectations, and the roadmap. Well, that goes into your job search too. Can you explain to somebody how you got this thing completed and what were the major steps that you followed to get there? And really, job seeking is around aligning your story to the needs of the organization.
Yeah.
And the second part of that is something that Craig was talking about, people owned everything and people were, you trusted the person on the left and the right. That's the team building part. That's the team link. There are studies that say that's even more important. So if you're able to show, I've done what you're looking for and I can explain that well. And then the second part of that is, you know what, on a bad day, I'm not going to dive under a desk. In fact, I'm going to be closer to you guys. We're going to be shoulder to shoulder. So that's the storytelling. And the more complicated you make that, the cloudier it is, the less likely you're going to succeed. It is simple, but it's an art. It's a building skill.
Very true and very well said. Sophia, when you think about keeping things simple, especially from a social media standpoint, what's something that you think everyone should know? What's something that you think is of high value? We're using social media to, share our ideas and also share our careers. LinkedIn is essentially your virtual resume. What's something from that concept that we can keep messaging simple?
Well, I didn't get to read the full book, but something that is really important is to be clear and concise. If you think about Twitter, for example, there's a word limit, a word count limit, and you're not going to be able to tell a full story that you'd love to tell. So you have to be clear and concise. And if possible, I think even using bold, highlight, nowadays, as horrible as it is, the younger generation does not have the best insight into being able to read a full journal article, and to really be in tune to like the highlight, being able to skim things. As horrible as that is, it's the reality that we face in social media, that not everyone wants to read a 30-minute article. So I think the points from this book that are really important to take away for the social media aspect is to really be clear and concise when you're going to be posting.
Thank you. So Mike, pulling it back to you for just a minute here, and then Craig, I definitely want you to help us kind of dive deep on this. When we're thinking about owning outcomes, right? A lot of times from a job seeker perspective, it doesn't go the way someone wants. And how do you suggest clients own that? I mean, there's part of you don't know everything that's happening, but then how do you own your piece? Right? Maybe you didn't follow up as much as you should have. Maybe you were late to the interview. How do you own, those outcomes and really lean into it and say, this was what I did and I could have either done it better, worse, what have you? How do you suggest?
I actually teach people how to answer a question about failure. And it covers exactly what you're describing. And there is, when I was a corporate recruiting leader, I would teach people to say, ask a failure question. What I'm listening for is this, though, and this goes right to the heart of your question. Number one, I want to see that they own it. They are not throwing somebody else under the bus. The second thing is, I want them to say, this is what I changed to avoid that happening again. Because here's why I'm asking. I'm not asking to find out their weakness. I'm asking so that if we start going down that path, that they're going to go like this and say, hey, slow down. This is a problem. In other words, I don't want them to make the same mistake twice. I want to use their failure to make sure we don't make it. So, that's the key. That's, to me, failure isn't you did something bad. Failure is something didn't work. I learned from it and I'm better, and I bring the better version of me to you guys.
Craig, when you think about ownership, and I'm kind of reflecting on the book a little bit, extreme ownership, right? Mm-hmm. So shifting completely away from pitch anything, going straight into extreme ownership, and kind of rereading the book, it really talks about how there was this large, combat experience in Iraq, and essentially the SEAL team leader failed, right? Mm-hmm. I believe the term was a blue, which means that it was, injury by friendly fire, and he had to take full ownership of it. How, from your military experience when you were promoting people as a leader, right, and then your experience at General Electric Company, how do you spot an owner? Because there's lots of good, let's say, anecdotal stories, there's lots of good platitudes, but how do you spot a true owner in an interview and know that they'll bring that ownership action into your business?
Mm-hmm. I think one good example to build off of what Mike was saying about the failure question, that's a great example or a great tool to understand ownership. And to Mike's point, we've all had failures, right? So don't be disappointed or saddened or or embarrassed by that. But it's, how did you recover? How did you come back, from that? And if that story is, you can tell if that story is genuine, right? Based off the detail that is offered, based off of, the empathy that the person may show towards the event. You can tell. Ownership is about, I've had people on my teams who said, I own it, I got it, but there was no follow-up or no action, right? So it was only topical. Ownership didn't go below the surface. But owners are, it's really about action. And I've got great owners in my team now, and I know they own it because I'll give you an obtuse example, but I'll say, we need to deliver these results in this amount of time, but I don't know how to do it, right? And I need your help to do it. Real owners are the ones that not only know how to go do the problem solving and take the initiative to go do that, but they're great at resources and know who to go ask for help from. I would say action to me is a true indicator of ownership, whether military or civilian career.
Wow. Thank you, Craig. That's a lot of wisdom, and I think our audience certainly appreciates it. So I really want to dive into, Harold, when you're thinking about teams and how you lead them to own. I mean, right now you're exploring and leading, Medical Innovative Collaborative. You've had a lot of entrepreneurship opportunities. How do you drive ownership? How do you look for someone to express ownership? Maybe from my background and my culture, I'm going to express it different than someone else. How do we put our DEI lens and leadership hat on and really dive into that?
That's a really interesting question, especially from a DE&I perspective, because ultimately what you're trying to do is find points of commonness. What do we have in common and what can we mutually gain? We don't have to gain the same thing, but we do need to get something out of it. In an entrepreneurial experience, you have limited time in a day, limited capital, and in a small team, every shot out of the gun counts. Every opportunity to engage with a customer, every opportunity to present in front of a purchasing team, that's critical. So you have to assess the needs of either the partners that you're working with, or to ensure that you understand who the customer is if you're doing a collaborative approach. And from that point, then the challenge is, unlike when you're working under a corporate environment where you're all pulling in the same direction, if I'm an entrepreneur working with a group of other entrepreneurs, we have to make sure that the customer is met with the outcome that they have requested. So for example, there could be an opportunity for a startup company who is trying to get a product on the market. They're going through regulatory. They don't have enough staff. They're not sure if they've met the unmet need of the audience, of their customers. They're not even sure who the customer is. To bring a team together to assist them in moving in that direction, to answer these very critical questions that have a lot to do with their survival or not. And of course, they have a burn rate that's just really out of control, and they need to contain that. So you understand all the issues, all the pain points that you're dealing with. But so let's now bring in a DE&I scenario where a person that you bring to the team doesn't look like the rest of the team, familiar to your client. So we need to get some comfort there as well, in terms of, this is a professional environment, this person can hold their own, and this is the best person for this position. So let's get all the discomfort out of the air, ask your questions, let's move on. And I think in a professional adult environment, it is an easy conversation to have, and it's a quick conversation to have. If we're new to the game and we don't have ownership of the process, we're going to be distracted by some social or topical issues. Well, I think that the answer is already pretty much in the bag. So extreme ownership means being an adult and mature about a project, asking your questions, hosting your concerns, and then moving forward from there.
Sophia, I'd love to hear, you mentioned you have a follow-up question. I'd love to hear it. Please feel free to double tab.
Well, I think that as someone from a younger generation, many individuals my age run into that resistancy to take the extreme ownership. And I know you're talking a lot about examples in the professional sphere, but how might individuals my age really combat that resistancy, especially going into the professional work sphere itself? Does that make sense?
It does. Could I climb in here? Could I join? I think your question is really important, because there are things that you know far better than anybody on this panel knows tonight. And to me, if you own your knowledge and you own your expertise there, Craig was talking about how people were trained to do, small but critical tasks well in the military. And I would argue that, the work you're doing right now in social media, that ability to communicate frankly, clearly, with high impact is critically important. And I would welcome your voice as a leader to say, how can we do this better? And, and I think, Craig affirming that, and Harold would as well. The fact that you have a skill set and an important skill set means you also have a voice.
Mike, if I can piggyback on that real quickly, if I am going to present a simple idea, I shouldn't have to use more characters than Twitter can allow. Because if it's complicated, I'm going to have to do a blog. If I can keep it simple, I can just tweet it out and everybody's like, got it, genius. And that conversation between any employees, any team members, whether they're old, young, anywhere on that spectrum, that's a conversation that has value. Didn't mean to interrupt, Craig.
No, Harold. I think brevity in presenting your idea, brevity in a question, because time is a very precious commodity. Certainly in a combat environment, but even in the business world, it's a commodity. So if you can get your message across very succinct, we used to. I heard earlier on in my business career of 7 by 7 when you're presenting on a slide, and that's no more than 7 words in a sentence and no more than 7 sentences. Move on. But I do have a follow-up question for you, Harold, about ownership and in this global world that we are operating in. I mean, we converse with different countries, with different cultures all the time. Does ownership look different to you in different cultures? Meaning a certain behavior in this culture means they own it, but a different behavior in a different culture. Do you see differences and do you have to evaluate that?
I think you do. While we may have the macro idea of what the finished result looks like should be, there may be differences of opinion from a cultural perspective of how to get there.
Yeah.
An example would be one idea was to try to reduce the cost of printing a catalog to show our product globally. Yeah. And at the time, the new digital color printers had come out. And so the idea was, why couldn't we just bundle up the images that we would normally put in a catalog, put online, and then just pull off the server when you need to print it at the specific regional location. Okay, let's give it a shot. So we bought these expensive, tremendously expensive printers, put them in Hong Kong, Singapore, Mexico City, Toronto, and Amsterdam. And we would only send the file the night before we left. So quick story longer. When we get to our location in Japan, there the catalog, or to China, there the catalog was all printed before we even sat down from the night before. What we didn't know was that the printer had sent a whole ream of paper from the US to Hong Kong. And they were trying to print it on the same paper so they would have the same feel, but the paper kept getting jammed. And so they would throw all the jammed paper away in the dumpster. But in the dumpster, it had all the pictures of the shoes for the next season. Oh, wow. So within the next week, there were so many bootleg shoes that were created from those images that had been thrown away in the dumpster.
Wow.
Needless to say, the project didn't work. But again, the objective was, can we get to the same result and print the catalog? Yes, we can.
You know what's, I'm sorry. What I was going to add to that is really interesting because you talk about cultural, and I think we also need to approach, and Sophia, you being here is awesome, age, generational differences. You know, I'm over 29 years old. I'll acknowledge it publicly for the first time. One of the teams that I managed a few years back were 4 Gen Z women that were brilliant. They were a microcosm. We had, 4 women, 4 nationalities, ethic. It was amazing. But you know what they did to me? It wasn't that I'd walk in and say, okay, we're going to do this. They would ask me a one-word question: why? And what was really interesting about that was there were some older leaders that I worked with who thought that was very disrespectful. You know what I found? They deserved the answer. They deserved the why. When I got comfortable, and it was really quick, when I got comfortable giving them a detailed why answer, they killed it. It turned out to be one of the best teams I ever led. But what I recognized was, my generation was told, sure, yeah, I'll go. There is more questioning now. I actually think that questioning, and Sophia, I'm so glad you're on the panel tonight, because that ability to ask good questions, that ability to want to understand the why, is part of leadership, is part of owning things now. Just like Carol was dealing with that cross-culturally, we now have to look cross-generationally too.
Absolutely.
I'm really curious to kind of like follow up on this one as well. Speaking as someone who is, I'm considered an older millennial, right? And Craig, when you think about managing teams, I mean, you've dealt with a variety of not just, let's say, genders and ethnicities, but people who are on varying scales of their career, people who are, union, people who are non-union. Do you find that kind of generational, I want to know more why, do you see it really becoming more common? Because, and Mike, please stop me on this as well. And Craig, you're welcome too. I find that when there's one person that really kind of steps forward and says, I have a question, a lot of other people are like, I have that same question too. That it very quickly kind of takes flight. Are you finding that's the kind of the common thread?
I certainly am in the work that I do and with the team members that I work with. I would say the younger generations are more curious. They're more courageous. They're hungry for information. I would say probably see better ownership. Maybe a little bit less patience, right? It's a completely different way of thinking and working. But having worked with again, new employees, new team members right out of college, they want that ball. They want to run with that ball, right? And my challenge is trying to keep up with them. But that's where, again, concise communications, the purpose of the team is they take the ball and run with it. Some of us who are in a little bit older generation, a more structured, tops-down type of communication, if we oftentimes took that guidance as, hey, that's the way we're going to go. That's not how today's workforce is working, and quite frankly, it's refreshing. It keeps me on my toes.
So would you say that that's a version of decentralized command, right? In the book, in Extreme Ownership, Jocko talks about, like, if you want to be really effective, you have to decentralize command. And that essentially the top down, I'm going to tell and you do, is really not something. We may think of that as what happens in the military, right? Because we've kind of have this romanticized, glamour version of what leadership is. Right. But really, it's highly autonomous people that have to get behind a mission and have to get behind an objective. That decentralized. And how have you gone about decentralizing command? Because GE, for a lot of points and purpose, is a very hierarchical, institution in a lot of what they do.
No, but that's changing in GE as well, Cynthia. I think it's I'm going to use a sports analogy, and that's probably something you say you should never do, but it's about, again, here's the ball, there's the goal line, you run the play, right? So we understand the purpose or the mission, but I don't call the play because I don't know every play. And I think in the military, the saying was you could delegate authority, but not responsibility, meaning as a leader. And like Jocko was saying in his book, right? He was ultimately responsible for everything. As a leader in the military, you are. But if you got to learn to delegate authority, in the business world, we call it autonomy. You gotta let the team do its work. Set the vision collaboratively. Let the team do its work. I've seen it in both careers.
And if I could play in real quickly, Cynthia,
Please do.
this flies right into the whole dialogue around job search. and how do you present yourself to different organizations, particularly if you have less experience. And I think what you just said there and what Harold's been saying is great. The idea of recognizing and be comfortable saying as somebody who's a little less experienced, I love to understand the why and embrace that, to say, you know what, where I've been successful, once I understood what was needed, I went for it. And I think particularly somebody early in their career should not feel like, oh my gosh, if I ask questions like that, they're going to slam me, even in an interview. I think owning that is a strength. And I'm really glad it sounds like you're validating a lot of that, Craig. And Harold, it sounds like that's been your experience as well.
Yeah, it's almost like listening to the other side of a stereo in terms of engagement, involvement, communication, team communication, and buy-in. Yeah, it's refreshing.
So on the communication side, and Craig, this is where I really want, to kind of, we talked about diving a little bit deeper and really kind of getting your perspective. We've talked about communicating cleanly, being consistent. And a lot of that is very spot on in a normal business environment. Have you found that challenged in the wake of COVID? Being a leader in supply chain, being, that's a business that's really hands-on. That's not really a business that you can work remote from your MacBook, right? How have you been, able to communicate that some would come in, some would work remote? This is the message is changing. How have you kept it clean, consistent, and also up to date?
That's a great question, Cynthia. Let me try my best at this. I think I don't want to dive too much into the COVID environment, but boy, have we learned a lot.
Yeah.
In this environment, and I think it has taught us not only how to operate more safely in certain environments, but we've certainly had to change our behavior, as well as as modernize how we communicate. I mean, look what we're doing now. I was doing this exact same thing most of the day today, with teammates, and the bottom line is our customers' expectations never changed. We still had to deliver the products that they expect of us. We've learned to work more in a virtual world, and I don't, the panel doesn't know this, I don't think, but I worked with Cynthia's dad for many years. Customers would come to see the products before we shipped them. They would call a factory test, and they would love to come and see this in person. Think of it, it's like you test drive your car before you buy it. You can't do that in this world. And so we've offered up a virtual solution. And what came out of that was quite remarkable. Number one, customers were very appreciative because they still were able to get what they wanted, to see the equipment operate. The side benefit is their travel costs are now down because some have to travel around the world. The good thing for us was this was a revenue stream that we never foresaw. And so we're offering this virtual solution that really is helping out. But so back to your question about just communication in this world, you got to stay true to the purpose, right? Stay true to the purpose, regardless of COVID or not. And I think the team is really prevailing. It really is. It's really fun to watch.
Can I throw a question in here? Because I think you just brought up something really interesting. Is you described that about how you deliver a product to your customer in an entire virtual sense. One of the things that I think is making some people nervous is the idea that they're going to be hired by people they never met. And I want to ask really everybody here, what's been your experience about really building a team that you're not going to see for a while? Craig, what are you doing about that? And then Harold, and Sophia too.
No, it's a good question. We've in this market, we haven't done a ton of hiring, as you would imagine, but we have hired 3 people, of which I've yet to meet them in person. But what's interesting about the collaborative tools that we're using here is we're getting more accustomed to it. I feel like with the exception of a handshake or maybe going to dinner, the relationship still feels like it's growing. But the other thing that's interesting, and I think everybody here is experienced it, we're experiencing it right now, is that this has become a little bit more of a personal world. I mean, you're seeing, unfortunately, my basement, but I'm seeing, parts of your house and the environment that you live in. I would say that the human element of this interaction, despite not being able to meet with them in person, that human element seems to help overcome that. So it's been a learning experience. I haven't seen any fall off in team performance or really sense of belonging. But that's my limited experience in this short time.
I guess from my perspective, working in a virtual world has been different in a positive way. I didn't use the word interesting, but different. One example is we've established through Medical Innovation Collaborative a really good relationship with Startup Central Nation in Tel Aviv. And while there is not a lot of movement back and forth between for the companies between the two countries, there is an opportunity for those companies to connect with partners here in North Texas and wherever else. And so while we don't have that physical confirmation of, okay, you are who you say you are, and I understand your humor, those kinds of things, there's a more direct role of, here are the things that we want from this relationship. You get clear agreement, you understand what the requirement is and what the relationship is built around. And then as we move down that process, a relationship more social, more informal builds around that project. So I never thought that would happen, nor did I think I would log as many hours on Zoom and Teams and Google. Well, never thought that, but nonetheless, the output of it is we are as effective, as efficient, and we're still building good relationships.
Nice.
Oops.
Hey, Sophia, I'm curious to know from your perspective, we're all talking with our jaded experience background. Well, I'm jaded. I won't add the other two guys in.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really curious how you're feeling about this. I mean, this dropped in the middle of your education. And how's it going for you? And how do you feel about this as you start to consider graduation and job search?
That's a great question. And it makes me laugh a little bit just because I feel like my virtual experience is dissimilar to yours in terms of creating relationships. I'm at home this semester. I chose to stay home, but so that means all of my classes have been online and virtually, and some professors choose to do like asynchronous, synchronous. All of my professors do meet on Zoom, but there's a huge disconnect that and even my classmates, whether if I do have a group project, it's so unfortunate. It's very hard to communicate with some students that you don't know. But it's also like I was a type of student who would go into office hours regularly. And office hours now, it's weird on Zoom. It can be awkward, and it's just not the same from my perspective. However, going into the professional world, being at home and having more virtual opportunities like this, I do feel more prepared to go into the workforce. So it's very interesting because I have expanded more of my opportunities. I've been networking so much more than I would have been if I was at school. But I think that my education has shifted.
Interesting. Wow.
Awesome.
I would like to add here, for just within this vein, talking about the demands on the workforce. I think for myself, as a leader of teams, as a female leader, this is the first time in my career I felt like I could really show up as my authentic self. Mm-hmm. Right? And really encourage, especially the women on my team, to do that as well. Because, we came in and work was kind of, this is work, and then there's your life outside of it. And we worked really hard to have those separations. I think now to your point, Craig, we're seeing each other's homes and kids and pets and dining room tables, and because this is where we are right now. And I think also it's required companies and leaders to have a lot of grace. That kids are going to show up in the coaching conversations, and you're going to see little hands in the Zoom, because children are quite enamored with all of this, as they should be. And I think it's a good opportunity for businesses to really lean in and make people feel inclusive. I was reading a white paper by McKinsey that said that while a lot of this work environment has disproportionately impacted women and minorities, there's also been a large expansion of opportunity and equality amongst those who are disabled. Because you're only seeing me from, the shoulder up, and we don't have to go through kind of a conversation about where, what, why, how. We just get to work and see each other on camera. And it also takes less for me to get ready to get to work. I can just be here with you. So I think, Craig, to the point you made, we've got a lot of good that's coming out of this. I'm interested to see kind of what pieces we keep, right? And what pieces we say, we're ready to do something else. One thing I did want to ask when we're thinking about this book, and Sophia, Craig, I know that you did kind of a highlight summary of it. Mike, Harold, and I, went through and read all 215 pages of it. What are we missing? Right. And I ask this in the context of, Sophia, we feel like we've got all of these, concepts, and to the point Mike made that, what are you experiencing? Right. So what are we missing from that? Are there things that as leaders we're missing as your generation is looking to come into the workforce and going through this? And then Craig, when you look at this book, there's a lot of, I think, glamorization that non-military have towards military, and rightfully so. Right? Our servicemen and women are incredible. But are there things maybe that we're overanalyzing that really aren't that?
I'll try to, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Harold.
So real briefly, I think that we may be missing in both of these books the assumption that we're prepared to have this conversation. In order to make things simple, that means you need to have control over the subject matter. It's assumed in the last book we read, because from a military perspective, they've done, the endless PowerPoints, all those things, so that everyone, both in the field as well as in administrative office, understand what the plan is. Not so clear on the pitch anything, although it was assumed and appreciated. But in our real world, if we are applying for a position, we need to know, cold hard facts about what the role is, who the company is, and who the competitors are, all those key metric pieces of information. If we get kicked off of our position, at least we know how to reset and move forward. So I don't know if preparation and the level of preparation is covered in either of those books as well as I think it should be, if success is the outcome for your pursuit.
Thank you so much, Harold. Craig, Mike, any thoughts on kind of all of that?
Spot on. I mean, I think what Harold was describing there is the books, the pieces that we pulled out of the books in the last few of our shows were really good. And as we talked about, to pull these ideas out around job search and career development that are normally not focused there is great. But I think Harold really hit on the biggest. It's not an omission because they weren't writing for this purpose. The idea of preparation is huge.
Yeah, to jump on the back of that, Mike, I agree. The preparation is so key, whether it be for a mission, whether it be for a project. I think it's absolutely key. To fall back on my days as a pilot, the preparation was vital, because going up is optional, but coming down is not. So you want to make sure you control the coming down. So the preparation included everything from, hey, where are we going? What time are we going to be there? Who are we carrying? But also every contingency you can think of. And I would say that, whether it be an interview or a project as well, Harold, you probably know that your project plan probably goes a little bit sideways the second you step out the door with it, right? There's going to be something that happens.
That's exactly.
But I think, so when you start to prepare for your job interview, you got to be, thinking about the questions that could be asked. When you're thinking about the project and the execution timing, is what are those things that could happen? And we in the military, we used to use a 3-to-1 ratio. It's like for an hour-long mission, 3 hours of planning. It just was that deliberate and that involved, and that's a huge takeaway. And I think that I think Harold and Mike, you hit right on it, big time.
Thank you, Craig.
Sure.
As we kind of think through this, anything that any of you feel that our audience would love to know. We've kind of taken everyone through this job seeker journey, how to level up, how to, own and be about your business, how to own outcomes, how to own conversations, how to present yourself, how to pitch, how to know when the deal is right, how to emotionally untangle from the deal, right? In Pitch Anything, we talk about how maybe it's not your deal and you walk away from it. And so the culmination of all of this, right, for tonight is that we really wanted to explore what could be what maybe we're not getting. And I think, Craig, Mike, Harold, you guys really did a great job of summarizing that and expressing, maybe what we're missing. So thank you. Thank you all. Any call to action that we should all have or know before we sign off?
I think I would go right to what we just talked about and add one piece. Sophia talked about her frustration with her education right now. The fact that it is remote, that it is, not, the methodology is so different now, and it has created isolation. What I really loved about Sophia telling that was her passion about how I use office hours. I did this. I had to have that real, true connection. What I loved about you saying that, Sophia, was your passion. And I think we're talking about two things out of this. One is, can you express your compassion succinctly? And can you prepare thoroughly? And I think if you do those two things, you're in a good spot for the next adventure. Your job search is going to go well.
I hope so.
And if I can piggyback on that, Sophia, I know this. I think what impressed me was again your courage. I think that today's college students or younger employees or team members, right, have got so many more data bites coming at them than we did when we were growing up. It's overwhelming, right? And the ability to manage that and the questions that you ask, what you've demonstrated about remote learning and what you're studying. Don't ever lose that courage, that edge. You couple that with your, succinct communications. I think you got it, but keep the courage.
Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly with both.
Thumbs up.
I love it. Well, everyone, thank you so much. I think that as we conclude this book, and for anyone who's watching, next week we're going to begin our fantastic book by John C. Maxwell, How Successful People Think. And so what we're going to do with this, while it's a smaller book, we'll still have 3 segments because there's a lot of material that we can really dive deep into as far as how successful people think. So when you're out at Amazon and you want your copy, you can obviously have it delivered to you. They've got it on Kindle, or you could just not read the book and dial in, and we'll be happy to talk to you about our learnings. So with that, have a fantastic week. Once again, thank you to our men and women in uniform. Fantastic. Craig, thank you for your service. We would not be here without you. And anyone who doesn't know, please go vote November 3rd. It's very important. And we bid you all good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 o'clock. Hustle Crew. Thank you.